Hello everybody. I think there's 131 person connected, which is just amazing. I'm still alone in my kitchen, which is a bit ridiculous, but that's that's what we live with. Thanks for being there. This is a session called Who Cares? Lessons learned on the road to gender equity in the humanitarian sector. So my name is Renaud. I work as a Deputy General Coordinator on the Myanmar mission of MDM France. A few technical things I have to tell you. There's a Twitter account that you can use. I have no idea how it works, but the hashtag is HCBerlin. I hope you tweetos know what it means. So hashtag HCBerlin. There's live captioning in the reception area for those who want that. We are going to speak English because it looks much more professional and cool, but I mean, English is not our first language for most of us. And there's the chat box where you can post any comment, question, contribution you may have during this session. So who cares? Well, according to many studies, care workers and health workers, 75% of them are women. And of course, if we look into social work, education, etc., we can see that women are overrepresented in those areas. And we also know that very, very often women are responsible for what we call the care at home, for taking care of children, husband, food, cleaning, etc., etc. So when comes a crisis like the one we are going through right now, we can see that women, of course, are the first affected. They're on the forefront of the crisis, but they're also the first to respond because of their job and the care work. And then, of course, when COVID strike, as any other crisis, you will see an increase in demand of care work needs. And then it seems that NGOs, international response, etc., will much focus on the response to the epidemic itself, forgetting that, well, life doesn't stop with a crisis such as the COVID crisis. So healthcare needs are still there. There's still desired and undesired pregnancies. People still have sex. People still need care. But it seems that everyone focuses on the epidemic itself and the rest seems to be forgotten. And then, of course, we witnessed in many, if not all contexts, high increase of gender-based violence and domestic violence as a result of those crises. And then let's not forget that in many countries, COVID comes on top of other crises. Like in Myanmar, where I work, there's the coup happening, which adds problematic to the COVID situation, and that the COVID is not the first crisis we are going through, even if it's much more huge than usual, but Ebola, Zika, all those crises are ongoing. So we take as a fact that women are over affected by those crises, but in this session, we want to focus on where women-led organizations have developed creative and innovative solutions to cope with that crisis. So we're going to take a deeper look, and mostly we're going to try to find recommendation and solution on how we could do better for the COVID, but for next crisis, because we know they are ongoing. So I have three amazing speakers with me today. First one is Lana. Lana works in Palestine. She's the project manager of ADWAR, which is reaching very isolated and marginalized women, trying to empower them. Lana, can you take a couple of minutes maybe to introduce yourself, your work, and what you do in general in life?
Good morning or good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank you for inviting us in such panels and in this conference. It means so much to us as a Palestinian organization. My name is Lana. I'm working at Adwar Association as a project manager. I will introduce the association quickly. Adwar Association is a women institution. We work in Palestine, in all of Palestine, and we work in Gaza as well. We're focused on development and gender equality. Adwar Association is working under three main programs, the social one, the economic, and the political, as we believe making barrel and these three issues in life will make women more powerful and more empowered. So we work in many sectors, and we focus now since the corona pandemic on the humanitarian one, especially as we give all the humanitarian aid and we help people as in Palestine we suffer a lot from the corona pandemic. So we try as much as we can to reduce these effects. Um, In Adwar, we also focus on marginalized women and girls and young women in Palestine who are living in Area C. And Area C in Palestine is like the areas who are under the Israeli control, not the Palestinian control, and they suffer from a lot of violations. So we focus on working in these areas. We focus on working with women in refugee camps, and at the same time, we start working in Gaza after the last war there. Like we opened a new branch for the associations there. So I will talk about the pandemic in particular, as we noted during the pandemic that women and girls need more support to confront COVID-19 and to reduce the violence towards them, especially the domestic violence, in addition to their exposure to many different types of bullying and their privacy were spreaded on the social media. They faced this during the pandemic. This is one side on the social level. So our interventions is to develop life skills and knowledge for those women and girls in order to confront the effects of COVID pandemic. Also, we gave a psychological support to raise their spirit in light of COVID-19 pandemic. We also did change the stereotypes for women, for men and to be more supportive for them. This is on the social level. So
Lana, and if I
yes.
may, we will come back on the COVID pandemic in a minute. I just would like to introduce our two other guests, and then we'll come back in details
Okay,
on
fine.
everything,
I
so we
thought
don't
we
mix.
have to.
No
Yes,
problem. I'm
okay.
coming back to you in a minute. Thanks for reminding us that, yes, Palestine hasn't waited COVID to face many challenges. And we're coming back in a minute. Ola, welcome to this panel. Ola, you're a maternal health expert, founder of Repro Life. You're going to tell us more about that. You work in Lagos, Nigeria, if I'm correct. I think it's the biggest city in Africa, which may count with many challenges, as we know Nigeria faces. And you work as a midwife in slums communities. Can you tell us more about who you are, what you do in general in this
Okay.
wonderful city?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to advocate and then amplify my voice for the people that I represent. I have a lot of people that I embody as a person, women, midwives, and then the various organizations that I work for. My name is Ola Jumoke Adebayo. I'm a midwife, an advocate. I work in slum communities, providing antenatal care to women and their babies in these slum communities. Then I'm also the founder of Repro Life. Repro Life is a social enterprise, and when we provide improve the well-being and health of women and then young persons through our service provision channels, where we provide contraception for girls that are unable to walk into the primary health centers. So we provide it discreetly for them at home and in a very comfortable place. And for the slum communities, we go into the slum communities that for women that are unable to afford antenatal care, and then they're unable to even walk down to the primary health centers because of the distance. And through these organizations, I've been able to provide quality care. And then I also advocate for midwives, ensure that try to amplify the voices of midwives and let governments and agencies know that midwifery care is one of the best forms of care that women need, especially in areas where women cannot afford medicalized births and things like that. And in all of this, there's been a lot of success stories, and then there have been sad stories, which I'll be very happy to share while we're talking.
Thank you so much, Ola, for being here. And then we are traveling all over the world to the Fiji Island with Sharon. Welcome, Sharon. You're regional manager of Shifting the Power Coalition. Can you tell us more about what you do in life?
Thank you so much. It's great to join you. So it's good evening from Fiji in the Pacific. I'm a second generation Pacific Island feminist, and I am based in Fiji. I come from a media and communications background, working across the peace, development, and humanitarian nexus. But currently, I'm the regional manager of the Shifting the Power Coalition. And we came together primarily because of the climate crisis in the Pacific, following TC Pam and TC Winston in 2015 and 2016, but also because of the underrepresentation of women in decision-making in the humanitarian sector. So since 2016, our coalition's network of more than 100,000 grassroots, intergenerational and inclusive movements across 7 Pacific Forum countries has been enabling women with disabilities, young women-led organizations, rural and coastal women's networks to use our collective power, influence, and leadership through a triple nexus approach based on our lived experiences. And that's, of course, addressing the ongoing climate crisis, but as we're all experiencing health pandemics, including COVID-19. Thanks, Renaud.
Thank you, Sharon. So we may see that in 3 regions that we are visiting today, like the challenges were there before the COVID. COVID just put a light on pre-existing challenges and ongoing crises. So Lana, I'm coming back to you with the second question. So what were the main challenges faced by the women you worked with? And most importantly, what creative, innovative solutions did they find to cope with it, to improve resilience? Can you take maybe 5 minutes to elaborate on that?
Okay. First, the problem in Palestine is we are a country at the first place depend on aid and help from the international society. So we don't have this much capacity to deal with pandemics or any crisis such as Corona. Also, the occupation is one of the most important challenges that we face in Palestine, as we were preventing all the aid, anything coming into Palestine. They were preventing them from reaching to people who really need it. I think I have a problem connection.
No, we can hear you really well. I mean, I can at least. I don't know. No, we've lost your picture. Okay, maybe we'll come back to Lana later. She seems to have a connection problem. Ola, you're up. Same question. What were the main challenges during this pandemic? Oh, sorry, Lana is back. Okay, switching back to Lana. That's
Yes.
live session. Sorry about that. Keep going.
So the occupation was, as I said, is the main challenge that we face during this pandemic. Also, the Palestinian government don't have this capacity to deal with such a crisis. And now, now I will talk about our experience in the association and how we dealt with the pandemic. And the association, we had to shift all of our projects in order to be as for the humanitarian aid. we were about to maybe close the association because we didn't receive any fund. So after a very long conversations with the donors, we had to shift all of our activities in order to be for giving aid, especially for such communities, the marginalized one we're working with. So in Adwar Association, we're working with 72 Bedouin communities living in Area C in Palestine who are marginalized and suffer from lack of services in many sectors, but we're focusing now on the health sector. So we did establish women protection committees in each one of these communities. This women protection committees is an informal bodies, represent all the communities, and they are the voice of the community. We all the time received from these women protection committees what they do really want in order to confront the pandemic. So we did implement many things, as I said before, on the social level. We give the psychological support for them. We reach around 1,160 women and girls in these communities. We did implement several projects in order to confront the pandemic. One of them was the project strengthening the role of the women protection committees as advocates of peace and security in a crisis that aims to empower women protection committees and activate their participation and plan effectively to respond in a humanitarian crisis in order to ensure that their special needs, especially for women and girls, are met in crisis and post-crisis situations. We distributed food parcels and sterilization bags, clothes for them in the targeted 72 communities. The other one, uh, we implement the project empowering women and support their reliance during COVID-19 in order to enhance their economic conditions who are most affected by corona in all of the West Bank. And also we give them the cash assistance, especially that in Palestine, they many women abandon their job. They forced to abandon their jobs because they give the priority for men in order to be in their position. Also, we did the awareness campaign uh, to reduce the bullying and against women who are infected with corona. We did give the psychological and social support services. We launched the helpline with the social worker in our association. Also, we monitored cases infected with coronavirus. We give them the support that they need. Also, as the violation raised in the families in general during this pandemic, we did implement a playing initiative for spouses, husband and wives and their children, and we give them um, toys, many things for the children and especially the girls, the younger children. After the corona pandemic, we start inserting all the time the humanitarian section in all of our activities. And we now focus on providing in each community we're working in like a health clinic or a mobile clinic. They are very far away from the city centers and they don't have any health aid or help. And I will give the example of how worse is the situation in these marginalized communities in Palestine. One of the communities, the kids reach maybe 5 years old taking any vaccination in all of their ages, the important vaccination that prevent them from many diseases. Also, because their nature of the nature of these communities, all the time they are subjected to snake bites and so on. When they need maybe 2 hours in order to reach the city centers, and this is a very bad health conditions they all the time face. We have many examples about how worse is the situation that women, especially pregnant women, faced in this section. I will not take much time, but in Corona crisis also, uh, all women in these communities prevented from taking the Corona vaccination because they are under the Israeli control, these areas, and in the same time they don't have the ID to prove that they are Israeli residents. They consider them Palestinian. The Palestinians are not allowed to take the vaccination. So until now, most of women in these communities and also all the families didn't receive the vaccination. This is in briefly what we did in Corona and what we face. And also the donation is the most important challenge, as we don't have any financial capabilities in order to face this pandemic or to try to reduce the effects of this pandemic on all the Palestinian families, especially women and girls in marginalized communities. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Lana, for your contribution. Thanks for reminding us, even if it's sad, that the high dependency on international help to reach isolated, marginalized women, and that it's even harder to reach them during a pandemic. I note also the importance of local women committees, even informal, but we can come back to that later to see how it helps during a pandemic. And also reminding us that when we talk about women, we often talk also about children because they're usually really close from one another. That's a good transition to Ola. Same question. Well, in the slums, I guess the challenges were there before the pandemic, but what happened specifically during the pandemic? How did your community went through, and what creative solutions and ideas they found during this crisis?
Okay. Like I said, like I work like with different communities and associations. And so for the communities where we used to provide antenatal care for the women in slum communities, first of all, because of the lockdown, we couldn't go back anymore. So for like a month, they were without antenatal care. About 6 weeks, they were without antenatal care. Then their babies missed immunization appointments, and even for contraception, we couldn't provide contraception. For example, in that community, the women are not allowed to take contraception because their partners and their husbands must not find out. So with the little we were able to do behind closed doors, we were not even able to do anything because of the lockdown and everything. So we had to wait for government recommendations on how we could move around before we could go. And when we finally could go into the communities, we had to reduce our antenatal care to once a month. Before we would do 2 times in a month, but then we had to reduce to once a month. And then we now had to do more sensitization because we had a break with helping women access care. So they felt we're not going to come again, because there's the slum communities in Lagos already have trust issues a lot with a lot of organizations. So they felt, oh, okay, probably we're not coming. And then they do not have phones that we could say, oh, we're communicating with them. So we had to find one champion in the community, which was a man that would communicate with, and then he would be able to pass whatever information we wanted to them. And then when we finally were able to start providing the antenatal care services to them, some of the women had given birth. We had missed appointments for the babies, so we had to start all over again and try to do that. For the primary health centers where I worked also, we had to close down for a while. And then when we eventually opened, the midwives working, we had to work longer hours. So a normal shift would be maybe a person would work 8 to 4 p.m. and then another person would take over for the night shift. But then now somebody had to wait in the primary health center for a week straight, so that we're not having a lot of interactions with each other. So it was really, really stressful for everybody. Women, midwives that live far away had to sleep in the health centers because there was not even any vehicle moving around to like transport you from work to your house. So it was a whole lot. So immediately the lockdown was lifted, we had a lot of women rushing in, especially for the family planning, because during the lockdown, they were all scared. There was already a rumor around that the primary health centers, if you come and then they give you any card, they would declare that you're COVID positive. So a lot of women they didn't, even after the lockdown was lifted, they didn't want to come to the primary health centers. They were all scared. So it took a whole lot of communication, and that was where I was able to work with the state government, the response team, the risk communication pillar team, and as the risk communication pillar team, what we did was we tried to do a lot of research on the things that people were talking about COVID, the misconceptions, the myth, and we were able to disseminate information based on that to the whole state. But one of the things that was really, really good about the risk communication team was because it was led by women. So we did not have information such as family planning left out of whatever communication we're disseminating down to the whole community or to the whole state. So because it was female-led, and then other response teams that were also working with the risk communication team, from the health education team that goes into the communities to inform market women and all of that, they were also led by women. So I can say that Lagos State had one of the best responses to COVID, especially in the area of risk communication. We were able to debunk myths, and we were not focusing on just like the general populace. We were able to say, oh, okay, women are experiencing this at this level, so we need to talk about how they can debunk this myth, how we can debunk this myth or take away all of these misconceptions. And it really, really helped. So after the communication went out, then we now realized that a lot of women started coming back into the health centers to access contraception services. They started coming back to have their babies in the health centers. Another challenge women experienced during the lockdown was for centers that registered their antenatal care. That's for the women, not the ones in the slum communities. Now, the women that could access care to a certain extent, they couldn't have their births at those hospitals anymore. They had to start finding maybe a new hospital around. And then because of the whole COVID issue, everybody was scared. So even if you come and you're in labor, they will first like keep you outside and say they have to do a lot of testing and all of that. So it was really, really stressful. But I can say that one of our success stories was the risk communication team were able to effectively disseminate information, and we're able to do it for women especially. We talked about pregnancy, we talked about breastfeeding, we talked about accessing contraception, and it was really, really helpful for the women. For the slum communities that we went back to, unfortunately, we had to reduce our antenatal services that we provided to them to once a month, but we were still able to catch up with the women, because when we were first going to the communities, we were very skeptical and we were scared. Oh my God, I hope we're not going to get exposed to the virus. But then eventually we're bold enough, we got PPEs, so we had to do a lot of fundraising, which is one of the major things we do. We had to do a lot of fundraising for PPEs, to get access to PPEs and ensure that we're able to go into the communities and then we're safe to walk in that area. And we are still continuing to provide services to these women. And I'm always happy to go there, because these women, if we do not go there, they actually do not have access to a midwife or a skilled health worker to provide them antenatal care or even to help with their babies. And we see a lot of conditions, from low birth weight babies to breastfeeding issues. So the pandemic just highlighted some of the issues that we had, and then it was very good for me, because it was now a point where I could channel advocacy to say, you need to invest in midwifery care. You need to invest in midwives, who are very important. You can't always put us as second citizens when it comes to healthcare. And majority of us are women. We need to put us at the front stage and ensure and encourage us, ensure that we're doing decision making. And this also prompted me to start doing policy and advocacy workshops for midwives in Lagos. So we bring them together, we talk to them about the advocacy process and policy making, because a lot of times these women don't even know that they can advocate for better healthcare and even better work conditions. So that has been what the pandemic has been like, and it has been, will I say, great and bad on both ways, but so far that has been our story. So
and chaotic, of course. Thanks for your sharing your experience, and thanks for, well, raising this issue. What do we do when we cannot reach, when we cannot provide services anymore, and the importance of pre-existing network and what you call champions, people in the community being able to work. We've seen the exact same in Myanmar, in Kachin State, when we were not allowed to do anything anymore. We had a network of peer workers, and they kept on providing services as much as they could during this chaotic time. Thanks a lot. Sharon, we'll give you the floor for 5 minutes as well. What were the main challenges and then the solution that you found in your community and your work?
Well, we're looking across 6 Pacific islands. So even before COVID-19, as I mentioned in the outset, as Pacific Islanders, we were living with the climate crisis, which obviously has slow onset impact, but also intensifying disasters. And another challenge in the context of this topic around gender equity was the persistent low level of women's representation, women's political participation, not just in parliament or elected government at the national level, but also in local and community organizations, and also recognizing that we have indigenous and traditional governance systems. So as women collectively, we have been working to redesign the table to ensure decisions are being made, are being accountable in the context of gender, age, ability, and location. In location, for us across the islands, we need to think about women inland and rural communities as well as coastal, and women in small island countries. So infrastructure varies as well. And these are also risk factors during humanitarian crises. Um, our coalition, as we established back in 2016, also established a feminist funding model or a rapid crisis response mechanism that ensures resources and support gets to the women through our coalition when they need it. It empowers the women leaders themselves to deliberate, participate, design, and deliver what works for them in the context of the crisis situation. So in 2019, for example, in Samoa, the YWCA there was actually able to document how gender inequalities also influenced healthcare, resources, and information in the midst of their measles epidemic. So this was even before COVID-19. And it was done reaching out to local women in their own languages, asking them how they access resources and information. And now in 2020, while the world was focused on COVID-19 shutting down borders, we had a Category 5 TC Harold barreling across 4 Pacific Island countries. So it traveled from Samoa, came to, Solomon Islands, came to Vanuatu, came to my country, Fiji, and then went off towards Tonga. In Vanuatu, our 3 partner organizations actually led the first Indigenous women-led response to a Category 5 cyclone. I think this is really important because, of course, because of the border shutdowns, the traditional or international humanitarian actors were not there. In January this year, we also had another cyclone, TC Yasa, and we were able to mobilize in Fiji 6 diverse first responders across Fiji's 2 main islands, providing emergency relief and convening safe spaces. As Lana said, these are so important, particularly for rural women outside of the capitals, so that they could discuss what was needed in terms of protection, how to enhance their participation in disaster response, and linking back into the COVID recovery plans for COVID-19 as well. women were also asked, what is the emergency relief you need, which is often not the case when it comes to government organized relief. Young women are also being resourced, and this is really important when you think about the demographics of the Pacific Island population. They're currently being resourced to connect climate science and climate services with traditional and indigenous knowledge to enhance voice and influence and to progress the collective call for climate justice. Because as we look to the future, we believe it's so important to ensure that young women are having the space to discuss and deliberate on what is the future that they want. And because of the nexus between COVID and climate change, it's just so critical so that they can identify the impacts of climate change on their health services, on their access to clean water. And currently in Papua New Guinea, as a result of bringing young women, women with disabilities, district leaders, and women's human rights defenders together, they have been able to develop messages on human rights, including disability inclusion, the prevention of violence, and the status of women, which is being amplified through an SMS campaign. And so far, they've been able to reach 4 million subscribers across Papua New Guinea, which is, almost half the population. And by the end of October, by the end of this month, we would have also enabled women with disability leaders to document their own stories on the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19. So from a regional hub perspective, this is really important because we know that we will continue to live with the climate crisis. We have had health crisis situations. The measles, like I said, in 2019. In Papua New Guinea, it wasn't just COVID a few months ago, it was also malaria. We are heading towards what is going to be our cyclone season, as well as our season for dengue and other weather-related health issues as well. So what is critical is the shift in power so that as we are thinking about the future, we're also thinking about the root causes of gender inequalities, the fact that we need to get women at the table where infrastructure is being discussed about how to get those health services to them in their different communities, and that the health services or women's health care is not just limited to one vaccination shot, but as Ola said, women's health care, it's sexual reproductive health rights, maternal health care, the health of their children as well. And so through the Shifting the Power Coalition, we're enabling Pacific Island women to learn together and to be able to also navigate and negotiate through this big system called the humanitarian system. Thanks, Renaud.
Thank you, and good transition for my last question. Thanks for reminding us that, women are underrepresented in the decision-making levels pretty much everywhere. I noted the rapid response model in terms of crisis. That's something we might come back. Let's not forget about young women, of course. And your pre-existing ongoing crisis as an island is the climate change, of course. You are probably the first victims of the global change. So we've seen in 3 totally different contexts with pre-existing challenges, whether it's the occupation, overcrowded big cities, or being an island. Well, you all mentioned fundraising, money problem, importance of pre-existing network to keep on providing services when there's such a crisis. Well, the third question is a question not only for you, but also for 187 people listening. I mean, I hope they are listening. What do we want to keep from that? What recommendation would we like to give to the humanitarian sector, the donors, the big international NGOs, so that for the next COVID or whatever is going to come next, because we know it's going to come at some point, we are more ready, more empowered, we have stronger network, we can cope a bit better. And how, maybe just a side note, but how NGO can start with themselves. I read this study that was that MDM participated in France, a very privileged country in many ways, in the staff, NGO staff, and the picture is not well at all. Like if you cannot take care of the woman in your staff, how do you take care of your beneficiaries? I don't know, Olga, if you listen, maybe you can share the link to that study. I think it's in French, but it's really interesting and depressing at the same time. So third question for everyone in the chat box and for you three, what recommendation would you give in a few words, because time is running really fast. We have 20 minutes left. Lana, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, I have two recommendations. The first one is to make the period of every project we implement more longer, because when the donor gives you a project only for 3 or 6 months to empower women, it will not happen, because the empowerment is a very long process, need to have many years in order to be implemented. So my only recommendation is to lengthen the period of every project they provide, and also to focus on the areas that they suffer from special circumstances. Like in Palestine, we suffer from the occupation, so they need to pay more attention to such areas, and to make the period of the project more longer, because it doesn't make sense that you are going to import some category of women or girls, and you only need only 3 or 6 months. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
The empowerment process need a very long time to be implemented, and maybe sometimes it will not happen, but they will be more better, you know. They will be more empowered in some issues and in some areas. And also, my second recommendation is also to combine the projects, especially for women, the empowerment project, with something they really need and they really want. Because I believe, and we believe in the association, if you empower the women economically, it will automatically reduce the violations and the violence, especially the gender-based violence against her. Because if Lana is under some violence, and she is financially dependent, it will be, of course, be reduced. So small example, in the communities, the Bedouin ones that we are working in, if we empower women economically, it will reduce the gender-based violence against them, because most of their problems and most of their suffering is from the lack of services. They don't have water, they don't have electricity, they don't have transportation lines, they don't have anything. They lack of all services that the basic human being needs. So this make their husbands or their children sometimes pose this threat on them, and because they don't have any places to go or to work with. So uh, like I can say it as having these parallel aspects and empowering, it will reduce the GBV against all.
Thank you. I have a side question from the chat just for you. How many years should this longer project duration be? You mentioned, and you're right, empowering takes time, but if you could dream, or if you were president of a big NGO, how long should those projects be?
At least 5 to 10 years, at
5
least.
to 10 years. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to ask the same question to Ola in a few words. Do you have key recommendation for the humanitarian sectors? And also I have a side question from the chat that may be for you. I'm just reading it. Did your project address any healthcare needs of non-binary and trans community member as well? And how can we include non-binary gender perception in humanitarian health services?
Okay, so first of all, the way Nigeria is, because a lot of people are not out with their sexualities, being non-binary and all of that. So we are not able to identify that that category to provide services to them. But we do not discriminate against anyone. So if we're able to identify somebody that is non-binary and says, oh, you want to have your birth, that's fine. Like, we provide antenatal care to everybody, but then they do not come out to say that it's only if you're working in an organization that is specifically targeted at key populations. I'm talking from experience, work experience here, is mostly you would find persons like that, especially if you are working in a key population area, because they are more comfortable in that space. But when we're working with the general population, we're not always able to identify persons like that. So we are not targeted to that population. But
thank you.
Exactly. So so for my key recommendations, first of all, I like to say we need to invest in midwifery care. We need to invest in midwives being at these decision-making tables. I'm sure if there are more midwives at the decision-making tables, we wouldn't be putting the addressing issues of women to one side. Because if you are making key decisions and a midwife, especially someone that is a woman, is there, she's able to say, oh, you're missing something out. You should include this in whatever response we're doing. So I would say invest more in midwives. There are not a lot of international organizations that invest in us as midwives. It's not seen as something that is very beneficial, but in the long run, it helps countries, it helps communities, it helps societies. So invest in midwifery care, invest in midwives. Midwives are one of the best professionals to provide, let me say the best, to provide healthcare to women, especially when they are pregnant, for contraception. We're empathetic. So what's the investment? So please invest more in midwives, invest in us to be at the forefront. And also I would encourage that let's invest in more grassroots organizations that are working with pregnant women, so that we can provide services, not just advocacy now. We're talking about service provision, because it can be very difficult for us to get funding to, say, provide money for us to provide antenatal care service, because these women need drugs for the antenatal during their pregnancy period, and then we have to always fundraise to get all of these things. And we work currently with our different networks and the communities to get free vaccines. That's from the states. But then there are other things that we're not able to get. So I would encourage, please invest in midwives, invest in pregnant women, invest in all of us, and then we will really be worth it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your enthusiasm and reminding us, to invest in reproductive health and midwife, because they are amazing and we'll need them at least once in our life. Sharon, to you with a side question from the chat. How would you see the role influence of young people in the gender sensitization of humanitarian decision makers and actors? And what platforms do they need or would use to exercise this influence? It's a question about younger people. The floor is yours for a few minutes. We have 10 minutes left. It's really short.
Sure. So from the examples that I provided, I think I made the point about investing, having dedicated resources for young people to be able to really organize themselves. And that's one of the things that we're doing with our Young Women in Climate Change project, and also in the way in which we're organized at the regional hub. We have, while I'm the regional manager, I work with a young woman. She coordinates the young women across the coalition, and we're practicing co-leadership and decision-making. So there's succession planning. I think there's a real need when we talk about young people also is to look at the gender dynamics, because quite often there are power plays there, as well as issues around identity and access. So one of my first recommendations, I think, is specifically aimed at INGOs, because what COVID has really taught us, and from the examples that I provided from the Pacific region, is that when you build and systematize a feminist model, an inclusive model of partnership and collaboration, and in this regard, women from 7 countries working and learning and supporting together, you have seen women mobilize at the local level. So what we need to ensure is when we are talking about or redesigning systems, that we're not reinforcing the existing patriarchal systems, and that those patriarchal systems we know also permeate into the women's movement, the women's space. And so we must also be investing, having dedicated resources for the intergenerational leadership and for young people as well, young women. And so equitable partnership models are the way forward. And feminist coalitions have certainly are providing that model across the globe. I think in terms of the humanitarian sector, there is a need, as we're hearing, to start to address the rights to safe maternal health care, the rights to political freedoms and political choices that we want to make as women. And so that requires a shift also in the dynamics around representation and listening to us in affected communities. And then I want to talk about financing power, because the financing power can sit with a few who decide for the many. And so we need to, as Lana said, look at the investment to make those transformative changes in our communities, not just here, have some money. So, for example, in addition to the rapid response grant, we're also fundraising for core funds for our partners, and that's what's needed. There are many feminist policy and funding models that can ensure that 50% of any local funding is actually supporting women's rights and women-led organizations, with dedicated allocations for the LGBTQI community and women with disabilities, and dedicated resources for young women-led organizing as well. Because the young people now, you are the ones who are going to decide on the future. This is the future that they want to reshape and redefine. And us as older leaders in civil society and the humanitarian sector must be providing and brokering that space. And finally, I think that the final point I want to leave is that, you know, too often people say, well, why have you got so many women's coalitions or women's organizations? Well, we're not a homogeneous group. And the fact that today's panel shows the different ways in which we are organizing from different parts of the world, that's also happening in our own countries and in our own regions. And if we want to achieve gender equity, we've got to look at the drivers of inequalities, and that requires many different approaches across the many different sectors that underpin the humanitarian sector, the peace building sector, and the development sector. Thanks, Renaud.
Thank you. So many things. I can't keep up with taking notes, but yeah, let's not forget the young people and young women in particular, redesigning the system outside the patriarchal system, having the right-based approach, supporting a women-led organization while respecting the diversity of it. And I have a side question for you, Sharon, from the chat. How easy has it been in integrating gender and disability in delivering assistance during the crisis? In a few words, because really we are running out of time.
Well, it's not easy, and I am not going to speak for my sisters with disabilities because I'm completely able-bodied. But we work with the Pacific Disability Forum, we work with the Women with Disability Forum, and that's why we're supporting their current work on documenting their social economic impact, so that we are learning from them in terms of what they need rather than deciding for them, so that we can progress what they're saying, leaving no one behind, particularly persons with disabilities.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just looking at the clock, it's 11:55. Still 184 people listening, so we lost only one, which is a good score, I believe. I will just take a final round. Lana, Ola, and Sharon, just final word, 1 minute or two maximum of what you want to say. Maybe you were inspired from what other speakers said. Lana, you're first. You're always the first.
Thank you so much. I would like to introduce my grateful for participating in this conference today and sharing this experience with many people who were with us in this conference. I would like to thank Sharon and Ola about sharing their experiences and introducing what they work. Um, I really thank you, and we have to keep work together in order to make this world better, all of us. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for participating. Ola, final word.
Okay, so thank you for this platform to just amplify the voices of women and increase our reach and let people know that women are very important, especially in making decisions and even making the world a better place because women are very, very important. And I have been inspired by the other speakers, and I have gotten some ideas to be able to organize better and then do more work for women, basically. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola. Sharon, final word.
My final word is we don't need any more commitments. We've got gender equality, women's rights commitments. We need action. There can no longer be bargaining on our behalf anymore as women. So enable us to drive just, inclusive, transformative local action. Work with us to redesign stakeholder processes and be prepared to shift the power to local action, to local women with the resources that they need. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No more blah, blah, blah. We need action now. Hey, we respect the time. 1 hour is really short. I guess we could have spoken for hours about that subject. Just wanted to say a few thank you to my colleagues in MDM, Olga, Pauline, Mariam, who helped me with numbers and figures and stuff. Thank you so much. Thanks to Tina, Lina, and Elena from MSF, especially Elena, who did an extensive work preparing and being in the background sorting all your questions. Thank you, of course, Lana, Ola, and Sharon for your participation. Good luck in your work. And hopefully this crisis will be over soon and we'll get ready for the next one. Let's be positive. I guess this session will be on YouTube if you want to share later with other people. And I was told to tell you that on the left part, there's a networking space and there's the expo space where you can spend your time waiting for the next session. Hopefully next year we'll meet in person in Berlin with a glass of whatever you like to drink in your hand.